Ladies and gentlemen, bonjour and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We are about to dive today into a great subject, moving to France. Before we start, I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge our audience. A warm welcome to all the followers of Frenchly, the leading digital platform for American Francophiles. Your love for French culture and lifestyle is real. And it is your interest that fuels webinars like this one. I'm thrilled to introduce today Fabien Pellissier. Hi, Fabien.
Hello.
For the newcomers, you are the founder and managing director of Fab Insurance and Fab Services, working for the English-speaking community with a simple goal to make the move to France as simple, as smooth, as Frenchly as possible. Before the summer break, we made a webinar together about the essential aspects of applying for a long stay visa in France, along with health insurance requirements. By the way, you can watch it on replay if you are interested. Today, we will shed light on visas, driver's license, and beyond. We will also have a Q&A session where Fabien will be answering your questions that I encourage you to send me along this session. Fabien, could you please tell us, as an appetizer, more about Fab Insurance first?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as you were, thanks for the introduction. As you were saying, so we basically have two main activities. Well, obviously, as the title suggests, we are selling insurance. We are an insurance brokerage company. So doing all the standard stuff, vehicle insurance, property insurance in France, and most importantly, insurance for visa applications or residency applications. But we also have a branch where we help, I would say, expats or people that want to have a second home in France, relocate or purchase a property in France. So with all the admin stuff that's involved in the process, and God knows how France is an admin country. So we help with the visa process itself, importing vehicles, getting a vehicle registered in France, the driving licenses exchange, or passing the test. Pretty much everything that you could encounter during a move or a purchase of a property in France.
And the first thing, as you mentioned, is the visa. It's an important piece that we need to get more information about. And my first question is kind of an obvious one. Well, what is the main difference between the long stay visa? I guess it's a 1-year visa, and the temporary long stay visa that is 6 months, and all the other visas.
Yeah. So. But actually, that's a good question, because at that stage already, some people got confused. So there are actually 3 types of visas, but for Americans, only 2. But basically, there are three types of visas. The first one is basically the tourist visa, which is 3 months, 90 days or less. Doesn't apply to Americans because there are agreements with France. You don't need to apply for a tourist visa if you just come to France for holidays or vacations. So it doesn't really apply in that case. Some country it does. So from the US, it's not really an issue. But then if you want to stay more than 90 days, actually the rules in 90 days per period of 6 months. So if you consider any period of time, like 180 days, you cannot exceed 90 days in France. Or if you want to exceed 90 days, then you'll need to apply for a visa. The type of visa then depends on what you'd like to be doing. If it's just like a long stay tourism in France, or actually in Europe, because France is part of Europe, so a visa in France will also allow you to, travel around the EU. Then if you want to stay for more than 90 days, but it's just like a one-off thing, you don't want to relocate to France, then you can apply for the 6-month visa, which is, as you mentioned, the temporary long stay. This one is perfect for that purpose when it's a one-off thing, one-shot deal, you want to go, one-shot travel. The problem is it's a non-renewable visa, which means there is a cool-off period until you can reapply for another visa. So if your goal is to say, well, I'd like to come to France, see if I like it there, and then potentially extend the stay, it's not the kind of visa you should be aiming for. It's just for, like an extended period of time, like a long holiday or something like that. For any other situation, if you want to stay for more than 90 days and potentially stay for more than 6 months, or even potentially permanently, like relocate to France, 1 year, 2 years more, then you should be aiming for the 12-month visa, which is in French. It's called the VLSTS, which is the long stay visa, and everyone applies for this one, mostly.
But what are the options if someone wants to move to France to work, to set up a business? So basically, first you have to assess their objectives, their goals, in order to identify the different long stay visas that are available.
So, well, this is correct. Well, I like to say that visas, long stay visas at least, and even short terms, but long stay visas mostly, they come in different flavors, if you like. So you need to have what they call a reason for the stay. So if you want to apply for a 12-month visa, obviously it's not an open bar. It's like you need to have a reason. Why do you want to apply for a visa? They want to know why. So the most popular options is if you'd like to come to set up a business in France. So that's the business visa. So you're applying in the context of a business application. If you want to come there as like a long-term tourist for a sabbatical or just for like 1 year, then some requirements will come along, but this is what they call the visitor visa, which is kind of the tourist visa, but it's also the one if you aim to be retired. It's basically the non-working visa, but they call it the visitor visa. And then if you are to be employed, there is the work visa. And if you are being employed as a senior employee and things like that, you could be applying for a talent passport. So it's talent visa, I like to call it. Or if you have particular talents as well, you could be applying for this. So basically there are different, flavors. The most popular ones by far, the 3 most popular ones, obviously the business visa, the work visa, and by far and large the visitor visa, because it's kind of the jack of all trades.
Mm-hmm. And as I understand, Fabien, there are 3 main, I would say, tests to get a long-term visa. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, indeed. Whatever the type of visa, well, obviously, what they require from you varies depending on the visa. On the visas I've mentioned, and most specifically for the visitor visa, again, which is the most popular one, like more than 90% of the American clients we're working with, they'll end up applying for a visitor visa, and we're doing 1,000 applications a year, so it's the vast majority. So for that type of visa and most visas, the 3 main tests, actually, they do make sense because there is a logic behind that. So the first one is they want to make sure you have an address in France, and like a permanent address. If you try to use an hotel or an Airbnb or something like that,
a PO box won't work. You need a physical address.
It shouldn't work. I mean, obviously, the guy, because your file will be processed by someone. In the US, it's a subcontractor called VFS. So it's a private, contractor. So sometimes they might look at the address you've provided, and they wouldn't know it's actually like a port, like a pier, dock, or an Airbnb. But sometimes they dig deeper, and if they find out it's actually that, then the visa will be denied. But basically, you should be providing them with a permanent address. So whatever, it's a rental property or some place you bought, whatever. It could also be friends. If you're hosted for free by a friend, they can write a statement saying that they'll host you for free. But basically, you need to have a place to live. This is very important. Obviously, they don't want you to end up homeless potentially. So that does make sense. The second test is what they call the proof of income. So for the work visa, you're employed. So that's the proof of income. But for the visitor visa, obviously, same thing will apply. They want to see that you will have sufficient resources to be able to afford a living in France. It's actually quite simple. What they want to see is that you meet the equivalent of minimum wage, which is roughly, I'm running at the numbers, but it's roughly 1,400 a month, or the equivalent of that monthly income as a lump sum in savings. So that also works.
Okay,
So either
and
you have the
also,
savings.
if in the case of someone that is retired, it will show his pension instead of a salary, right?
Pension, whatever kind of income, or again, savings.
Okay.
The savings should be what they call available. So for example, if it's a 401k, it doesn't work. You'll need to withdraw from the 401k, have the money on the side. Then that doesn't prevent you to then put the money back, but you need to have the money available. They want to see that you do have the cash.
So the liquidity, I understand. And at the same time, how do they evaluate? Do you have like to have
bank statements? It's very easy, whatever proof usually it's a bank statement, And then the third,
in terms of amount.
oh yeah. Well, when it's a monthly income, for example, it depends obviously on the source of income. If it's dividends, then they'll just want bank statements showing that you've had dividends on a frequent, on an ongoing basis, like for the past couple of years, for example. Or if it's a payroll, bank statement seeing the wage being paid every month. Or if it's a visa, you're not supposed to be working, but then, again, it depends. Or it could be the payslip if you're unemployed. If you're self-employed, it could be, again, the bank statements. Usually bank statements is the thing to go.
What am I insisting is because I see the questions that are popping up, and someone are giving me amount of salaries or incoming recurring income. Do they need a specific budget amount per month? For example, someone's writing, I have 1,400 a month in euro.
No, it could be per quarter. Again, that's what I was saying. It could be per quarter. It could be you should have the equivalent of this. If basically what they'll do is they'll calculate this on a yearly basis.
Okay.
So that's why, whatever this is, a saving or quarterly payments you receive or monthly payments or whatever. It could be a rental, you can have rental payments from, properties you already have. So whatever the source of income, obviously everything could be in euros or in dollars, but obviously then they'll convert at the current rate during your application. And if it's that, obviously we highly suggest that you have a bit more because the rate obviously varies depending on the time. So yeah, this is important. The third test is the proof of medical cover, obviously, because this is where we usually work, because this one is not very well documented. So it's very important because there are big major US companies that do sell policies and says that they are visa compliant from a US perspective, but most of the time they end up not being compliant in France, like Signa, for example, or Bupa, because they don't want a policy with a deductible. There are plenty of requirements that should be met. Won't be bothering you with this, but this is why it's important to be working with people that actually know the French visa application process. And at the end of the day, it's also very important because very quickly, many people actually don't know that if you do relocate to France, you can apply for the French social security system very quickly and be part of the French system pretty much for free. And so eventually you will no longer need the policy as well. So you need proof of income, proof of medical cover, and proof of address or proof of accommodation, as they call it. These are the three main tests, very important.
Concerning health insurance, my next question is a very American question because of how it works here. Someone is asking if I have a pre-existing medical condition, can someone find an insurance for the visa anyway? Can that person be covered by the French Social Security eventually without exclusions?
So this is where it gets very interesting, especially from a US perspective, because so first, again, the system is basically for free. So obviously you'll be living in France, so you'll be filing tax returns in France eventually. So meaning you'll be paying your taxes in France. So in a way, you're paying towards the system. But what I mean is you will not have extra taxes. You will be taxed as if you were French. You would not have an extra tax because you came from abroad and never paid towards the system before. So it's pretty much for free. They'll never, again, when you're private initially, this is a different story, and I'll answer this one. But then once you're accepted into the French system, whatever the situation, we never ask any single question in regard to, are you disabled? Do you have liabilities to be declared? Are there existing conditions, etc.? Never, and everything will be covered 100%. And even until you're covered, whatever is not covered or might not be covered by the private medical policy. So obviously we do have solutions in all situations, but the goal is to understand that France is a very, very cheap country when we consider medical care compared to the US, at least. When I say cheap, it's like worst case scenario, a day at the hospital is going to cost you 500 euros. This is one of the most important expense you could experience. If you have like a heart issue, you need to see a doctor and have an ECG done. This is going to cost between 80 to 120 euros. Consultation with a general practitioner is going to cost 25 euros. Like, this is the kind of expense we're talking about. And I'm talking without insurance. This is the out-of-pocket expense if you have nothing.
So if you have nothing, that's one scenario. Can you tell us more why there is a complementary health insurance system in France, how it works? I know there have been some new laws from President Macron recently. Please tell us more.
Well, so although the French system works very well, there are things that are still quite expensive from our perspective, which will still sound cheap, I suppose, from yours. But so obviously dental cares, the glasses, not optical cares, but the glasses themselves, just the spectacles, and sometimes the hospitalization. But again, in contrast to the US, it's very cheap. But from a French perspective, we kind of used to pay nothing. So when it's not free, we consider it to be expensive. So in 2020, a new set of regulations was put in motion by President Macron, which is called the 100% Santé. And what it does is basically when you go to the dentist, you'll be provided with at least one option that's for free. Like even if it's a root canal or you have to have prosthesis done, whatever the job, whatever, if it's a very, very complex one, even if you have a very high correction, and it needs some very particular glasses, you'll be provided with at least one quote that is free. Obviously, the Social Security itself will not cover it. And usually, like, for example, for a prosthesis, it's probably going to cost 1,500 euros or something like that. It could be much more, but let's say it's usually that. Social Security will only refund 150. So you're left with quite a lump sum out of pocket. So, but with the 100% Santé, the top-up health insurance will actually top it up to 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, then the dentist will probably try to push you towards more comprehensive treatments, which are not 100% covered. But this is the idea behind the 100% Santé, so that even with the most expensive expenses in France, medical expenses, you will always be provided with at least one option that's pretty much for free or with no out-of-pocket expense. Actually, there is like a 1 euro out of pocket, and the French are actually complaining about that because 1 euro is too much already. But so you have the idea.
Well, the French medical system is a big incentive for the Americans who consider moving to France, right?
What it is because transportation is free, like the ambulances, the emergency services are very good, the ER as well. Oh, nothing's perfect, obviously. There is always a bit of sand in the machinery, in the cogs, but on average it works really well. It's pretty much for free, and we have quite high-end doctors. Well, obviously in the US as well, but you do need to have quite a lot of money to be able to afford the high-end specialists, for example, whereas the out-of-pocket expense in France would be like 50 euros is considered like a big out-of-pocket expense, for example.
So let's say that we have a place to stay. We have proved that we have some regular income. We are properly insured from a medical standpoint. We are ready to drive deux chevaux in France. What about driving, Fabien, in France? Can we drive with a US license?
So the US has always been a big issue because it's not the US. It's actually on a state-by-state basis. So each state in the US has different agreements with France. in regard to driving in France. So this
So
is
what you're
why
saying,
there is no one single answer.
I
So
see,
some states,
it's not federal, it's state by state that you have to look for the regulations, and that's part of the job, right?
But so if you do type in Google, like, driver license exchange France, just that, there is like an official website, the French official website, where you say the state where you're from, and they'll tell you straight ahead if the state you're in, actually not the state you live in, the state, your driver license was issued by a particular state. So that's the state you need to consider. So if you got the license in Florida, but actually you're living in Oregon, well, then you need to have a look at Florida. Okay.
I see.
It's the state of your driver license.
I understand. So,
and in some cases, it might be worth considering changing the driver license from one state to another if you have a driver license that's not from a state that has agreements with France. But so to get back to that, so you're legally speaking, you're allowed to come to France and drive in France for 1 year. Okay. Whatever the state has an agreement with France or not, actually. So it's 1 year. But if you want to exceed that period of 1 year, after 1 year, you're supposed to have exchanged your license for an European one, but obviously, as you're living in France, I'll assume it's for a French one. If not, then technically speaking, in theory, you should no longer be driving in France until you have actually settled that. So that's also an issue that you need to address very quickly, because you could be left. Obviously, if you're being pulled over, etc., no one will know exactly when you arrived, so it's a difficult matter. But one guy will be after you if you're in that situation, and this is actually the insurance company, because they know when the policy got started, and after the 1 year, if you didn't secure the French license, for example, your policy will be terminated.
And you told me that it's getting tougher and tougher to get insurance.
Obviously, insurance, they're sales agent in a way. So we are happy to sell you a policy. But so many agents and brokers, they were happy to kind of, look the other way, like, okay, you didn't exchange the license, but no, the policy is active. So, well, I won't be chasing you for that. But basically, the regulators and the French government are putting pressure on insurers so that our files are actually, compliant with French regulations. And because of that, obviously, then the insurance companies are putting pressure, they eat on the agents and the brokers like me. And therefore, many policies, like for a couple of years, are being canceled. And actually, it's getting dire then for them, because if the policy were canceled, then they have an history of an insurance company canceling the policy, which makes their file even more difficult. So this is why it's an important issue. It's very important.
Yeah, the premium might go up. I want to clarify something with you, Fabien. You're using the term exchange. It means that you have to give up your US driver's license in order to get a French one. What if I don't want to?
Yeah, so we do have this scenario quite often for two main reasons. So sometimes they don't want to, although they often end up accepting, even if it's not completely willingly, because they understand it's much easier. Or you don't actually intend to become a French permanent resident. You just have like a second home in France and just want to have a vehicle there, insured and all. And by definition, then you don't want to exchange your US license because you'll need it in the US. Because exchanging a license means they'll basically cut off the original American license. Well, in situations like that, in theory, this is not legal in France. You should not be able to own a vehicle in France. Although obviously everyone's doing it, because then I was mentioning, insurance agents being sales agents at the end of the day. Well, same goes with car dealerships. They're more than happy. They don't want to turn you down if you're here to buy a vehicle. They'll like to sell you the vehicle. So it's easy to secure, to purchase a vehicle. But then you might end up in a very difficult situation. So actually, there are workarounds the issue. We do that every day. So you could actually create a company, which is very, it costs just a couple €100 a year, and then actually buy the vehicle through the company. And then it becomes legal again because the company is French. But the company is French. So there is always a workaround. But in theory, you're supposed to either pass the test again to have a dual license or exchange a license.
Mm-hmm. So those are some of the tips that, and it's only the the tip of the iceberg, basically, that you're saying, because I know we had a chance to exchange, you and I, many times, and each time I hear something popping up that sounds obvious sometimes for you, but actually that can save so much trouble to someone who wants to move to France. Can you give us a few example of tips? For example, there is a fiscal number that you need to get. That's something that many people don't consider.
Yeah, this is really very French, because so if you intend to live in France for like a long period, so 1 year or more, then at some point you'll need to either renew the visa or extend the visa or apply for something. I like to call that a residency permit, but we call this a carte de séjour. So to apply for that, it becomes discretionary. So it's done in France by a governmental body that we call the prefecture. And basically, they'll decide based on how French you look, well, not physically, like your file, that they'll provide you with a residency permit of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years or more. So it doesn't change the fact that you can secure or not the residency permit, but the better you file, the more shoe shining you've made, and the more French it looks, the better the odds of you securing a longer term residency permit. And so one of these things, for example, which is super easy to get done, it's just you need to be aware of that, is to apply for something I like to call a tax code, because it sounds better in English. In French, we call that a NIF. And it's actually like a fiscal code, like a code that says, well, I'm ready to file the taxes. It's not a tax return, it's just having the number, and that makes you look much more French, because you're ready to file your taxes, and so they love it. And so this is one of the trick that we use. Another one is not a trick, but so you can apply for the French to be into the French social security system after being in France for 90 days. And actually you should start doing that like straight ahead, like as soon as you can, because when you've been in France for like 9 months, for 10 months, and it's actually usually takes like 6 months to get the social security codes or numbers. So if you do have the numbers after you've been around for like 9 months, for example, then it's almost guaranteed that you'll have a residency permit. If not, then and you'd like to renew the visa, then it's actually what happened. They won't give you a residency permit. They'll say, no, you need to renew your visa because you do not have a French social security number. So if you discover that very late, or decided to apply after 6 months, well, after 6 months, I mean, sometimes it's fast, but most of the time the process takes like 6 months to get done. So it's highly unlikely. So that's why the time is also of the essence. So it's very important to time things, properly as well.
You also have the example of opening a bank account.
Opening a bank account is the same, because again, these are the things. There's so many things you need to be aware of. Obviously, I'm like bombarding you of information, but when you're a US citizen, the US government wants every bank all across the world to actually inform them of the assets that US citizens might have abroad. So, and it's a mandatory requirement for all the banks. So obviously, when you walk into a French bank or a new bank, and you say you're American, they know that they'll have the mandatory obligation of submitting your bank statements every year to the US government. So this is basically extra work for them, and that doesn't come with extra money for them. So it's basically they have to work more for the same thing. So most of the time they don't want you. So actually opening up a bank account in the EU or in France when you're American is very difficult. Obviously, we have agreements with banks and we make the process easy, but when you don't know, it seems like something, it seems like something casual. You just open a bank account, it's very easy. It could actually not be the case. So this is the kind of thing that you discover usually while doing it, and then it turns into a nightmare. It was supposed to be something, you didn't even think about it.
Let's talk a minute about these discoveries that pop up along the way if you are not helped by a professional. There is a timeline, right? There is a timeline of different things, when to activate, when to apply for the visa, when to activate the visa.
Exactly. So
I read
Well,
from a testimony of one of your clients that there, and you didn't mention that before the summer when we had this webinar, they received some kind of email. It's like a timeline with milestones to tell them to anticipate.
oh yeah. So obviously, yeah, when people are working with us, we so it's not a commercial, but we have like a newsletter, and obviously we know the date when they have moved to France. And from this date, and every major step of the way, like 30 days in, 90 days in, 6 months in, 9 months in, etc., we send an email with kind of a sum up, like, okay, this is what you should have done. This is what needs to be done at this stage, and this is what comes next. And you're right. There's so many things. You know, obviously there is a visa application that's done abroad. You need to do that in your home country. But then when you're in France, then you have 30 days to activate the visa. And once the visa is activated, well, 90 days, sorry, but usually this is done within the first 30 days. And then once the visa is activated, then you can start the driver license exchange. And then once you've been around for 90 days, then you can start the social security application, etc., etc. There are so many steps and small things, you know, and everything could be done. Like, for example, the visa activation could be done straight ahead or 60 days later, you know. And so we do kind of incentivize that's okay, you should be doing that right now because it will make your life easier later. And once you've succeeded after that 1 year, you've done all the steps, you've done everything, it gets so much easier. I've seen one of the questions which was very relevant because someone asked in the chat, is there no permanent resident in France? Yeah, actually there is. It's just that, as I was saying, this is kind of a process which is not fixed. So it's like, first you have the visa. Well, I'm assuming you secure the French social security number, and then you're provided with the residency permit. So the residency permit then could be like a 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, well, it varies. But at some point, you'll get what we call the permanent residency permit. So it's a 10 years permit that still needs to be renewed every 10 years, but renewal is pretty much automatic. Well, unless you've done an act of, you know, an act of terror or some terror attack or something like that, you know, something very bad. But if your situation is pretty much the same, even if it changed actually, but when you have a 10 years visa, they basically say, okay, do you still have an address? Are you still in France? Okay, then they'll renew the visa. The 10 years visa is the permanent visa. So that does exist, yeah.
I know, Fabien, that we already spoke about visa, but I want to make sure we understand, because there might be some kind of misunderstanding because the wording for visa in French is a bit different. What if I fall in love with the French lifestyle and I want to stick around for more than 1 year? How can I achieve that?
Yeah, so for the first year, it has to be a visa. And again, long-term visa, 12-month visa, VLSTS, you know, already quite a lot of wording to describe the same thing. And actually, even the visa itself sometimes is confusing because I was saying it's a VLSTS, but the TS at the end, that stands for a French word, which is titre de séjour. And as I've mentioned, the residency permit is called the carte de séjour. So it's very close. So, you know, obviously, it sounds like it's the same. So the wording is very confusing because basically, and especially when we translate it into English, because sometimes we use different words to describe the same thing, or sometimes we use the same wording to describe different things. So, well, it's so confusing. So that I like to say I'm using a particular vocabulary to make sure we're on the same page. But obviously, you might discover, you know, find out other wording elsewhere. What I like to consider is when you're applying from abroad, so from your own country, so from the US in that case. So when you're going through the VFS, which is the subcontractor in the US, then it's the visa application, okay? And then you're applying for a 1-year visa. And then when you're in France, I prefer to consider it's a residency permit. You're applying for a residency permit, so the carte de séjour. And then, as I mentioned, there is just one exception for that wording in my world, in my view, that if you failed to actually secure the social security number by the expiration of your visa, or by the time you need to apply for the residency permit, then they'll deny the residency permit and say, okay, well, you're not French enough yet, so you need to reapply for a visa. The difference is they'll allow you to apply from France instead of going back to the US to reapply for a visa. But from my perspective, a visa is when the thing you need to do when you're abroad initially, and then when you renew the visa or extend the visa, whatever the wording, I prefer to call that a residency permit, and that's what we call in French the carte de séjour. But this is different from the titre de séjour. This is different. So again, so this could be the same thing. This could be different things. Depends. And sometimes people call the VLSTS a residency permit because it allows you to stay in France as well. And there are other wordings. There is the passeport talent. Sometimes you don't even have a visa. It's a passport. So and the visa itself is a stamp on your passport, actually. So, you know, so the wording can be very confusing. This is why it's important to not get lost in all that translation.
And that's why you need expertise and assistance to help you navigate through these intricacies. It's complicated. And I heard that sentence that is quite interesting. They might hear, "You're not French enough," and it's interesting because it's all about vocabulary. And I want to use an analogy you mentioned with me earlier. You said at some point of time that when you check all the marks and when you check the process, the timeline, the milestones and everything, basically you are building your credit score. It's a different credit score. It's a being French credit score.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I wanted to elaborate on that because I think it's a very good analogy.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, you're exactly right. For example, if you bring, so you can come in France, for example, with a foreign registered vehicle. So coming from the US, if you'd like, you have a collection vehicle you'd like to keep, so you can import it into France. But if after 1 year you're still with that foreign registered vehicle, so first it's illegal in theory, but obviously we won't throw you to jail, or a cop will not show up at the door and say, okay, you need to import that vehicle. So it's a possible situation. But then they will not like it at all. They're like, well, why didn't you take the time to do that? So if you don't have the tax code, again, it's not mandatory. But if you don't have the tax code, they're like, well, why didn't you do that? Actually, they probably won't tell you anything, but it's basically you're not helping yourself building that credit score you mentioned. In a way, it's like French fiscal score or whatever. And so everything is like, Social Security is a must. You should get into the French Social Security system as soon as possible. But having a French bank account instead of, I don't know, a Revolut bank account, for example, they like it as well. Again, all these rules, they are non-said rules. You know, no one will tell you that. It's just the more you show things that looks like some French native would do, or the more you exchange or apply for things the French way, I would say. So again, the driver license exchange, the NIF code, so the tax code, so having applied French Social Security and being accepted, etc., etc. The more they can see things like that, the higher the odds of you securing a longer-term residency permit. Because, for example, if you're really lucky, you could even secure like a 3 years or 5 years residency permit straight ahead after the first renewal. And then the second renewal might actually be the permanent residency permit. So it's doable. I've seen it. Okay, obviously, usually you have to renew 2 or 3 times until you're provided with the permanent residency permit. But if you have checked all the boxes and you come at the first time for the residency permit, you could be granted a very long residency permit. So that's why it's important to do that. And even if they don't, because they don't like you, or there is well, one small thing, you don't need to speak French at all. There is no French test in all of these steps. They'll never check how French you speak. Actually, they want to see how French you are, but even if you don't speak French, they don't mind. It's just for you, obviously. If you don't speak French, at some point, well, it will cost you quite a lot of money because you'll have to, you know, to pay translators and things like that. But it's important to know it's not a mandatory requirement. There is no French test. And being French, like if you'd like to consider staying in France forever, you don't have to apply for French citizenship. It's not a mandatory requirement as well. You can stay on the residency permit forever.
Like the green card in the United States.
Like the green card, yeah, exactly.
I wanted you to share, please, Fabien, the website address while I'm going to be asking the questions that we received. I will discover them as I ask you along the way. After arrival in France and registering and activating the long stay visa, how long does it take to hear from the prefecture for the health check?
So the health check is only mandatory in countries such as Italy, so Spain, for example. So it's a possibility in France. It's not automatic. Actually, many applicants won't have to go through the health check. So
okay.
So it's not something you'll have to do every time. So if you don't hear from them, it means you don't have to go through that or to do that.
Concerning financial situation, I have initial V who wrote us the 1,400 a month. Is it in euros or in dollars? And basically, what is that? Is that the minimum per person that you need to show?
So that requirement evolves over time. Again, I've rounded up the numbers, but it's basically minimum wage in France, the SMIC, as we call it. So SMIC. So if you type that on Google, like French SMIC, then you'll see the exact number. So obviously it's probably like a rough number. I'm giving the net you should have. You should be making. So obviously this is in euros. And so if you don't have it in euros, then you should have the equivalent in USD. So it's probably going to be 1,700 or something.
Per individual.
Per month. Well, no, actually, there is like a discount if you're applying as a couple, or even better as a family. But if you're applying as a couple, it's actually much lower than this. It's more like 2,000 euros per month as a couple. It's not 2 times the minimum requirement.
Okay.
It's
Michelle is asking us for statements, either bank statements or paycheck stubs. How many months worth do you need to provide? 2 months, 3 months?
Well, so this is a tricky question because it do depends on the kind of income you have. Again, most of the time when this is unsure, bear in mind that actually in that case, the less you show them, the better. So if you have multiple sources of income, etc. For example, if we know you already have the money on the side, so if you have savings, like it's probably going to be 20,000 or something, So if you have $20,000, I'm trying to do the math in my head. So in dollars, probably to be like 20,000. Okay. So if you have 20,000 or more USD in savings on a bank account somewhere, so that's the easiest way forward. You just show the bank statement with 20,000, done. Whatever the income, whatever done. But so if you want to show ongoing recurring income, then the ideal is to have like a contract, for example, the employment contract, or indeed the paycheck stubs. But it depends on the kind of income. For example, if it's rental income, they want to see that it's something ongoing. So if they're not sure that potentially perhaps it's a 6 month, if you have like a short-term contract, or if it's dividends, for example, what's the proof that you'll keep on having this?
Okay.
So they want to see. So sometimes they can ask for 1 year of statements just to make sure that this is something you've actually had frequently.
That is recurring.
So that's also why this is something we work on individual basis, and that's why this is the kind of stuff we actually usually the most advice we make. The most important advice we make is this one. It's like, okay, we look at the documentation you have. We just highlight. Say, okay, this is what you should be showing them, and that's it. Because also this is very important. You'll have to undergo a physical interview in person at the VFS center, and that cannot be done by anyone. And if you're applying as a couple, you can do like a joint application, but for the appointment, you'll have to go through an individual interview each. So although there could be one after the other, it's an individual interview.
And they will check if you gave the same answers, like in the movie with Gérard
Well, yeah. No, actually, well, obviously it depends on the agent you're with, but most of the time it goes very well. But it's also very important because, well, I think we've done like 1,200 applications last year. It happened only once, so it did happen. But so if you do provide them with too much information, and some information is actually contradicting the supporting documentation, or just sounds weird from their perspective, what happens usually is like they won't like it. But if on paper you still, check all the boxes, then they'll revert. Instead of giving you like a 12-month visa, they'll grant you like a 6-month visa. Because
you raised suspicion in a way.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Michelle has a second question. She mentioned something I haven't heard before. She read about needing repatriation insurance for life planning after death. Is this true? They can ask for that?
Yeah, so yeah, correct. This is a requirement for a visa application. The policy should include a repatriation plan. Although I would say, well, the most important bit is mostly repatriation whilst you're still alive, which is preferable. But you need to have repatriation, whatever this is, the mortal remains, or in case of severe, because basically, again, the idea is that on your policy, for example, it does engulf the issue of the medical exclusions as well, potentially, because if you have medical conditions on the private policy, it's highly likely that you'll have exclusions. And until you're accepted by the French system, you basically pay out of pocket. But if you could go back to your home country because you know you could actually afford the care, it's probably going to be cheaper in France. So again, we never had to do that. But in theory, the goal is to say, well, if you can't afford the cares in France, then you need to have repatriation so that we can repatriate you to your home country where perhaps you have the Obamacare or something like that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it needs to be included. So for death, this is true, but usually, I mean, this is not the main concern. The main concern is to have repatriation, period, whatever your life or death.
What is the cost of medical coverage? I guess it's difficult to give a number, but is there an average for the cost that is required for visa approval?
It depends on the age band, obviously.
Yeah, so many factors.
We have quite a lot of customers which are, I would say, early retirees. I don't like the term because they're still quite young, you know, they're in their 50s usually. But when you are, let's say, mid-50, you know, 55, just to throw a number out there, it's going to be a bit cheaper than 2,000 euros for the whole year. Yeah.
I have a question for Mark. Mark is saying, I have US health insurance that includes deductibles but pays for services in France. I also have a pre-existing health condition. Is my understanding correct that I will have to purchase French first dollar health insurance, but my pre-existing condition will be excluded even though it is covered by American health insurance? Is there any requirement that I give up my US health insurance when purchasing the French health insurance?
So you could have multiple policies. There's no such requirement. That's doable. But then, yeah, you actually probably done some extensive research, because it's actually the French wording to call that the first euro, not dollar, but the first euro. We call that the first euro policy indeed. And that's the kind of policy that's required for a visa application. This is correct. And unfortunately, you're right. Whatever the policy, even if it's top notch and the cover is outwardly, if there is any sort of deductible or excess of copay, whatever, even if it's just like $50, you know, whatever, if it's not zero, they'll reject it. So
let's dive
the policy
into,
without any exclusion and any deductible, without any deductible.
let's talk about driver's license. We have quite a few questions about the subject, Fabien. If I own a car in France and have received car insurance, but I only spend a few months a year in France, not as a resident, do I need a French license? Will my insurance continue past 1 year?
So this is the tricky situation. So you're in that case, this is the worst case scenario. So usually then you have to do the math, because it's going to be a bit complex and a bit costly. So no, you cannot. So legally speaking, you're allowed to do that, because your US license, if you just go to France a couple months a year, then your US license is valid. But from an insurer's perspective, if we provide you with, because your US license is valid temporarily, because you're just coming to France on a temporary basis, and that's why it keeps on being accepted. But if from French perspective, we would be insuring the car all year long, so permanently. It's a permanent policy you're purchasing and not a temporary one. And because it's illegal in France, even if you're not using the car, it has to be insured. There is no such thing as an off-road policy or something like that. So the problem is, no French insurer now will want to insure a vehicle if you're not a French resident. And so you could be a foreign resident. They don't mind about this. but then you need to have an EU license. So the workaround is to actually purchase the vehicle, or if you already have it, to sell the vehicle to a French, what we call a société civile, which is basically a company that doesn't make any profit, doesn't make any turnover, doesn't cost much. It actually costs less than €100 a year. But obviously you have to pay an accountant and things, so it's probably going to cost 300 a year. But if you do that yourself, it could cost less than 100 a year. And just if that business is the owner of the vehicle and that business is yours, then it's insurable and that's doable, and then you can keep the vehicle for pretty much as long as you'd like, and even have multiple vehicles. That's completely fine. But if it's just you directly owning the vehicle and being the owner of the vehicle and being American and not having an EU license, and therefore not a French license, then, well, I won't say bad word, but then you understand, you're...
I live in a state that can be exchanged for a license in France, right, Greg? What other documents do I need? I do know I need a recent driver's history. Do I need to know when I originally passed my driver's test? How much details do they ask for?
Yeah, so you're right. So they require the driver license. Sorry, the driver history from the state or from the states, because if you've been through multiple states, that a couple of stuff, but that's pretty much it. I mean, the whole process is described online on official website. It's very easy. The website I've mentioned, well, very easy. Well, it's French process, so do expect some hurdles. But but there is one thing important. Insurance-wise, you may have, and this is very frequent with Americans. So again, that's also why you need to work. Well, obviously, I'm happy if you work with us, but you could be working with anyone. Just make sure you work with someone that do know the business with experts already, because there are two things that usually are an issue when you've exchanged the license. The first one is very, very often on a US license, it doesn't work like a French license. On a French license, you have the original date you passed the test, and then the expiry date of the license. Actually, you have 3 dates: the original date, the date you got the license, and when it expires. You only have 2 dates on the US license: the date you got your license, this one, and the date it expires. And when they convert your license, they consider as the original date you passed the test, the first date you have on the US license. But very often I have people which are in their 60s and they just got the license, the US license renewed. And then they say on the French license that they got the license a couple of years ago. And then now they're young drivers in France. So obviously we can overcome the issue, but this, for example, is a massive issue very often, because then they get kind of screwed by the insurance companies if they go with people that don't understand the American market. And then the second thing is the conversion of there is it's not really a thing in the US, but there is the conversion of the discount, which is kind of a commercial thing. You know, the insurance discount is commercial in the US, but in France, this is something regulated by law. And so with actually the driver license, the driver history from the state, we can recreate a French legal discount, and that will help you lower the premium. It could be even up to 50% cheaper. Because whatever, I mean, even if we see parking tickets and offense, minor offense, they won't mind. They would just want to see what are the claims you've made towards the insurance, so that we can calculate the kind of discount you would have been eligible for in France. And then you can be provided with a discount straight ahead without having been ever in France.
Michelle is very active on the chat. Thank you, Michelle. Is a license required for motorcycles or scooters? And is insurance coverage required for either or both?
Any vehicle. So actually, the rule is simple in France. Some vehicles, most vehicles, will require to be registered. So this is legal. When the guy will sell you the vehicle, whoever, you'll know, they'll tell you that you need to have a carte grise. So it's the vehicle's registration document. If whatever you're buying comes with a carte grise, then it needs to be insured and the license is mandatory. Whatever the vehicle, well, even electric bikes nowadays, if they go faster than, I think it's 50 kilometers per hour, you need to have a license to drive that.
Mhm.
So, well, obviously they're supposed to be capped, but yeah. So, so this is the rules, and everything needs to be insured. So only the bikes, the bicycles, only the bicycles don't need to be insured. Everything else, motorbikes, scooters, whatever, they all need to be insured. And sometimes you need a a specific driver license. For example, for motorbikes, it depends on the, if it's a 125cc, if it's, it depends on how powerful it is. It's actually the power output. Most of the time, if it's more than 50 kilowatts power output, the engine powers. I mean, it's very technical, but you'll need a specific license.
Mhm. We have a few minutes left. Can we try to do this, Fabien? I shoot you questions and you answer quickly, so as many as we can in the coming minutes, if possible. Let's try to do that.
I'm sharing the link with my Calendly. If some people want to book appointments with me, I'm also sharing my screen so that they'll see the website if they want to have a look at the website as well. And yeah, please shoot the questions.
All right. If you maintain a driver's license in the US, can you just rent a car in France when you need it, or it's still the same?
Yeah, that's doable. No, you don't need a French license then.
That's doable. It's pretty much the same question from the next one is, if I don't intend to buy a car but want a French license for rental cars, do I still have to give up the US license?
No.
Basically,
you can do that with the US license. Worst case scenario, you may have to apply for an international license. That's usually what they require, but that's, it's perfectly doable and simple.
I lived in Paris 20 years ago. I was on a work visa. I had a bank account. Do bank accounts get closed after a certain period of time, or non-use?
Well, that I cannot answer. So the short answer is no, but then you just call the bank and figure out if it's still active. If there is money in there, it should still be active.
What do you recommend? Elisa is asking, can you bring your car from the US, or should you buy a new car in France?
Depends on the car, if it has sentimental value or not. Most of the time, it's cheaper to buy in France, but it depends.
When applying for a visa, how does one get a French address when you don't live in France yet? You have to secure in advance that address?
Yeah, we also have a very good trick with that. Ideally, if you can purchase a property, the seller is very happy to provide you with the lease agreement until you actually have purchased the house, so that this way you can start the application of the visa, even if you still don't have the property, or secure a lease agreement, a contract with the landlord, as usually the easiest way forward. But we do have solutions for that as well to help you out, settle out the first address initially.
Interesting question. It's a follow-up question, actually. So once someone gets the French social security system, that person will no longer need the repatriation insurance policy, right?
Yeah, that'll be covered by the state. Yeah.
I'm French.
Potentially the top of interesting. Yeah.
It's interesting. I like the first name. Her name is France, France, and she says, "I'm French. Does my husband need a visa to stay in France with me?"
Depends the nationality of the husband. Considering it's a non-European nationality, then yes. Although everything will be easier and faster, but yes, the short answer is yes.
Bruce wants to know if there is an age that he cannot drive, he will have to stop driving.
So not in France, not yet at least, but not in France. I have customers that are in the 90s and still kicking, so hopefully, yeah, no problem.
How long does it take usually in terms of logistics to buy a house in France from submitting an offer to closing escrow? It says, I've heard it takes 3 months. If you're buying outright without needing a mortgage, does it still take 3 months?
No, it takes 3 months because the state and city hall, the mairie, has the right to purchase the house instead of you, and you have so it's a 2-month period, and then you also have a 30-day cool-off period where each the buyer and the seller can change their mind. So yeah, that's 3 months. Yeah.
And the last question. The last question is from Tamara. What are FAB's fees to help US citizens with these transition to France?
Depends on the type of visa, because it varies. The business visa, for example, it's much more complex. You have to write a business plan and all. But again, on average, it's visitor visa. Visitor visa is 1,500. That's what we charge. And we actually have baristas, lawyers that do that for us as well. So it's not actually not just us. It's a legal process we take seriously.
And in terms of the timeline, when should someone contact you? While in the United States, how many months in advance do they have to anticipate the preparation of moving to France?
Yeah. Well, ideally, at least, 3 months ahead is very good. Well, not too early. If it's 1 year ahead, you could contact us. We could provide you with the answer, but it's a bit early. I would say 6 to 3 months ahead is ideal for us. No sooner than 30 days. 30 days is too soon because the visa itself will reject your application. It's too soon. This is too late, sorry. So
Great.
30 days at the very worst, but 6 to 3 months ideally is best.
Thank you very much, Fabien. You see the address of the website, fabinsurance.fr, on the screen. Also in the chat, Fabien just shared the Calendly link in order to secure and reserve a spot to discuss more in details with you and anticipate things. Thank you very much. We did it before the summer. We're doing it now in September. Let's do that around Christmas. Let's discuss after that.
That would be a nice gift.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone. There will be a replay of this webinar, and we will receive it in the newsletter on Frenchly. Stay tuned, guys. If you want to listen to the replay, take notes, because we covered a lot of subjects today with you. It was very interesting. Thank you so much. See you soon.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye, friends.